Hello, folks. Welcome to Dialogos, where philosophy is not just a conversation, but a way of life. In this episode, we bring our discussion on the origins of mystical philosophy to a culmination, revisiting some fundamental questions that emphasize the significance of our dialogue up to this point. Today, we'll be exploring guiding questions such as why is it significant to understand the origins of mystical philosophy? Why is it significant to study the social origins of mystical philosophy, as Cornford outlines? Why is it significant to study the metaphysical and existential origins of mystical philosophy, as Hyland proposes? Why is it significant to study the psychological origins of mystical philosophy? Why is Pythagoreanism a perfect case study for understanding mystical philosophy's origins and significance? And finally, why is the study of the origins of mystical philosophy relevant today? Let's dive into each of these together. So let's first shift to this first question. Why is it significant to understand the origins of mystical philosophy? So to begin our journey, we first ask the broadest question. Why should we study the origins of mystical philosophy at all? In my view, understanding the origins of mystical philosophy provides a comprehensive understanding of the complex matrix from which philosophy arises. It involves social factors, as Cornford identifies, metaphysical and existential impulses, as Hyland emphasizes, and psychological dispositions, as modern personality theory suggests. The social factors include collective representation, herd suggestion, totemism, and nomos. We've talked about these previously, but I think just for the sake of a refresher and providing some understanding, I can just briefly go over each and provide some illustrations. So, collective representation is defined as the shared symbols, myths, and rituals that express and reinforce a group's worldview. For example, creation myths. Herd suggestion can be understood as the amplification of belief or emotion through group dynamics and shared intensity. For example, chants at a religious festival. Totemism may be defined as a symbolic connection between a social group and a plant, animal, or natural element considered sacred. For example, a bear clan. Finally, nomos may be understood as a cultural and cosmic order that shapes law, ethics, and social norms. For example, divine law in ancient Greek polis or city state. These create the communal soil in which early philosophy germinates. Metaphysically and existentially, philosophy emerges from the human yearning to inquire into the structure of reality, an impulse rooted in wonder. And by wonder here, I just mean a profound sense of awe and questioning in response to the mysteries of existence. For example, that sense of awe that you get while gazing up at the stars. Psychologically, now, individual traits like openness, emotional sensitivity, and existential restlessness contribute to philosophy's emergence. And just to give a brief gloss of these terms here, openness simply is the personality trait marked by curiosity, imagination, and receptivity to new ideas and experiences. For example, having an interest in abstract art. Emotional sensitivity may be understood as a heightened awareness of one's own and others' emotions, often leading to deep reflection. For example, empathic response to suffering. And then existential restlessness may be understood as deep, persistent longing for meaning, often accompanied by dissatisfaction with conventional answers. So, someone, for example, who is having a midlife spiritual crisis. And ultimately, studying these origins is transformative, not merely explanatory. It draws us back toward the living flame of wonder and inquiry that first birthed philosophy. So, Ryan, this is my initial take on this first guiding question. Why is it significant to understand the origins of mystical philosophy? I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on this matter.
Yeah, I think all the factors they're important in explaining the origins. The only thing I would really maybe add to that for the audience would be considering how these elements interplay off of one another and how they might interact. So they're not just isolated factors or things that um, have uh, relations. So like the metaphysical and the existential, um, these might be existential or metaphysical conceptions of what death means, and so like certain social factors like the collective representation of that might vary from culture to culture, or the response to that collectively. Um, so those are things to consider as well. And then each person might have a different psychology, so they might have a different leaning or propensity for having certain uh, existential inquiries or metaphysical leanings.
Hmm. Yeah, those are all, I think, very relevant points you bring up there regarding why it's important to understand the origins of mystical philosophy, and especially all of the elements we've been looking at. But I guess what I drew out of that was that there's an interplay between these factors. They're not um, factors that operate in isolation, but they're somewhat entangled. They're integrated, and and perhaps they're a part of a unified whole, which we dissect analytically, but they're all part of the same. They're all branches of the same tree, as it were, right? I think, um, and um, and then as to this other point you made, I thought this was a spot on. As to cultural variability, um, from culture to culture, we'll see collective representation, herd suggestion, totemism, and nomos maybe manifested differently through different symbols, through different rituals, through different totems and different laws. And um, again, I think that those those are culturally relative. They can be culturally relative, but I also feel like there's maybe culturally universal elements too across cultures, despite the variability um, that mystical philosophies maybe have a unity across cultures too, which might be interesting to talk about. And
Uh,
then just this last point. Sorry, Ryan, I don't want to cut you off. I'll just quickly put out this last point, and then I'll get you 2 cents. And then just the individual differences part as well that you mentioned, the how variations in personality and temperament come into play in shaping the emergence of mystical philosophy, which I think is pretty fascinating. But I think, like you said, there's an interplay here. These are all branches of the same tree. So, anyways, I'll shut up now, Ryan. I know you want to jump
no,
in, so
no.
go ahead.
I was just gonna say that I think mystical philosophy might be unique in the way that it represents certain things like life and death, sort of that cyclical nature to it.
Yeah.
I think there might be sort of a cyclical nature to there's a unity aspect, like a oneness aspect in mystical philosophy that isn't necessarily present in other pagan traditions. Um, and I think that is maybe what makes it a bit counterculture or unique in the way that it operates as a philosophy. Um, and I think that's what makes it, yeah, stand out.
Yeah. No, I think those are some good insights you put forward. That what you think is the differentiating factor between, say, mystical philosophy in its genuine expression and, say, pagan religions which preceded it is this emphasis on unity, on the cyclical nature of life. Um, yeah, I think that if you look back at ancient religions and myths, that you see those things to a degree, but I feel like that in the evolution of um, mythology to philosophy, you see a transition from purely symbolic representation, as in, say, um, ancient myths where the Greek gods were central, like the Olympian gods, I guess, in the scientific tradition, or um, you know, Dionysus or Orpheus or Persephone in the Orphic tradition. We see a shift from these symbols to abstractions when it comes to mystical philosophy, and we see that in Pythagoras, for example. Um, we see, for example, um, that this notion of reincarnation was originally represented in Orphic religions as this allegory of Persephone descending to the underworld and undergoing like a symbolic death and then a renewal and a rebirth. In Pythagoras, you see that kind of those symbols transfigured into abstractions, so that reincarnation is no longer just this allegory, symbolic allegory, but that it's an actual like law of the universe, in which we physically die and we're reborn as like as a matter of like mathematical necessity in a way.
This is what my like fellow Christians are about, right? Like, the resurrection of Jesus, isn't just a metaphor. Like, we're not just like saying that as like an allegory or something. You know what I mean? Like, he literally died, and then 3 days later he was resurrected.
Right.
Like a lot of you know people who aren't religious might see us say something like that, and they're like, "Well, you must be joking. Certainly, you're not serious."
Yeah.
And some people might not have been serious. I don't know how long ago, um, but yeah, it's like a true belief in these things. It's not just this weird abstract death and rebirth cycle. It's like, no, 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 you die and he was resurrected
Mm-hmm.
again, or we do actually get eternal life in him.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we actually believe those things.
Right. Right.
So yeah, like, this is why I find the origins of mystical philosophy like really interesting, is because I find it's like laying this foundation for understanding my own faith, and like where that foundation was laid, because
Mm-hmm.
this shift in focus on like unity and oneness, it's like that's the predecessor to like monotheism, right? Like, there's an order to all of this. There's like a central organizing principle, and like, this is even the cults where things started to begin to shift towards a heliocentric model
Mm-hmm.
of the universe. So like, the sun, Jesus being the center of the
Yeah. Yeah.
it's the thing that yeah. So
Yeah.
to me, this is just like, yeah, an interesting foray into Christian mysticism and the Bible and all that fun
Yeah.
stuff for me.
Yeah. No, I think it's from whatever spiritual or philosophical tradition uh, you identify with. I feel like the studying of the origins of mystical philosophy can really enrich, you know, your own understanding of your own philosophical orientation or religious or mystical orientation. I know it has with mine. I feel like in studying this in the depth we have been, Ryan, now for weeks now, maybe going on months, is for me, it's brought to mind the interplay between mythos and logos, and how the two aren't necessarily mutually exclusive, but complementary. And I think that they can be on a continuum, um, and so um, yeah, that's something for us to ponder, I guess. Um, and I think that you hinted towards um, how this approach we've been looking at kind of sort of um, brings to our understanding the um, the centrality of order to the universe, and how I guess the Greeks would think of it in terms of a cosmos. The cosmos means a ordered reality, right? And um, I think that's at the root of Pythagoreanism and Christianity as well. I feel like these are part of maybe the same lineage in certain ways. Um, but yeah, in any event, I don't necessarily want to get bogged down too much into the weeds. Um, and of course, this is just our first question we're reflecting on. Do you have any other thoughts you want to get in? I don't want to cut you off prematurely or anything.
No, let's go on to the next one.
Okay, let's go on to the next one, Ryan. So, and we can maybe circle back to some of these because I think they'll come up maybe in other questions we look at. So, um, the next question I want to pose is why is it significant to study the social origins of mystical philosophy? And this is essentially Cornford's approach. So, turning our attention now to the social context, let's ask what role did early communal structures play in shaping mystical thought? And so, here's my take. Philosophy arises within a container. The collective symbolic world of early societies, such as the mythic cosmologies of ancient Egypt that influenced early Greek speculation, um, and Cornford's account of collective representation shows how shared myths, rituals, and symbols like the Orphic narratives of soul purification and the Dionysian rites provided a framework of meaning. Herd's suggestion explains how communal emotional energies amplify belief, as seen in the ecstatic states induced by the Eleusinian mysteries. Totemism reflects the sacred identification between humans and nature, such as tribal associations with serpents or eagles during initiation rites. Nomos reveals the deep connection between societal rules and cosmic order, exemplified by Pythagorean practices like silence and vegetarianism that mirrored their vision of mathematical harmony. So I think in sum that studying Cornford reminds us that philosophy is not an isolated achievement of lone geniuses, but it's a transformation of inherited communal worldviews into reflective inquiry, such as when Pythagoras reinterpreted Orphic doctrine through numerical cosmology. The soil of society was necessary, but the flowering of philosophy still required individual initiative, as seen in figures like Heraclitus, who questioned traditional Ionian beliefs while offering his own vision of the Logos. So that's my take, Ryan, on why it's important to look at the social aspects of the origins of philosophy. So I'd be curious to sort of, um, gain your perspective on this.
I think that this here release is just saying that if you want to change your experience or perspective on something, then there are certain practices or rituals that like you have to engage or that you should ought to engage in. So like engaging in a certain nomo, so certain societal rules, and doing so with other people. So like if you want to actually know what Christianity or a certain religion is all about, the best thing to do is to go see for yourself, right? To go like immerse yourself in the culture, abide by the practices and the rules, and that's going to be sort of transformative for you in the way that you see the world, right? And I've used the example with your work, Graham, a couple of times.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like you first come into your workspace or this new space, and the environment seems fairly uh, chaotic in a way. Like you don't really
Mm-hmm.
understand how the things in the room are connected, and there's not a lot of meaning that you can derive from the things that you see. But once you've sort of engaged in the societal rules and norms of the space and the group long enough, the whole space and the way that you experience it transforms. You see it how the group sees it. It's like you you're engaged in a collective experience of the world.
Hmm.
It's no longer your own, right? You're able to see it through this mystical vision that has been created by the group.
Right.
And but you can only access that by actually like doing the rules and like following the policies and like you know what I mean? That's how you get there.
Right.
And so like that's a really interesting piece of information. Like if you want to become something and you want to learn something, like that's what it takes. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
like
for
the way
sure.
that you see the world will change. Like when once you start doing those things.
Yeah, for sure. I think you know that I think those are interesting examples you bring up, and I like the way you framed that. I think that what you're getting at is the importance of these sociological factors towards you know um, enriching our understanding of certain religions and spiritual practices, and even um, you know um, organizational visions, like my own workplace, for example. And I don't think it's necessarily limited in nomos or the rules of society or the rules of the universe, but we could also look at it symbolically as the shared beliefs and symbols, um, sort of the what practices reinforce these symbols, um, and you know what um, what sort of um, identities are formed around certain totems, uh, plants, animals, natural symbols. I think those come into play too. And of course, yes, nomos, of course, is central. But like, I suppose thinking about this more concretely, like in terms of my own workplace, um, we have certain collective representations about what it is our organization is doing. Like, we're supporting those who are vulnerable by providing them with, basic necessities to support daily living, like food and, clothing. We're doing, um, these this vision is kind of reinforced through, um, the daily work practices we engage in, like just our standard operating procedures and things that we do, like giving out breakfast at 10 a.m. Um, and certain totems, I suppose, even. I'm not sure what my organization's totems are, what symbols that um, represent its vision, but you can think of like sports team mascots, for example, like an eagle, you know, um, representing, for example, like strength or um, you know, uh, precision or something like that. Um, and in that, and then nomos, of course, are kind of like the principles that my organization is based on. Like it's based upon like a harm reduction philosophy. It's based on supporting the autonomy of our clients, the residents that I serve, and so forth. And yeah, so those are this is the social matrix, I think, that really helps to clarify and elucidate the social nature of philosophy and mystical philosophy, especially. Um, and I think that resonates with how you might approach understanding your own faith too, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think like the ways that we do that is like similar across the board. Like it could be for an organization, it could be for a sports team, it could be for a genuine cult. You know, it's all kind of funnily the same thing. the same process.
Yeah.
It's how people work, but
Yeah.
um, yeah, I've undergone like, I've moved around a lot. I've moved schools. I've been on different sports teams, and I've seen all kinds of different people. And although they're different, it's like the same process that you have to undergo to kind of get to really truly understand them on their level. And yeah, it's the same process, kind of like how to get to know somebody, um, or get good at something. It's a learning process.
Yeah. Yeah. Precisely. It's a process, and I think it's a process of immersion, like you said. I think that um, you know to kind of internalize a philosophy or a religion is to immerse yourself in with people who adhere to those religions and faiths and so forth, um, and you'll get a sense of the collective representation and how that's passed around through suggestion, as you know as evident in things like rituals and so on and so forth. And you might even be converted to a faith or a religion in virtue of that. Um, but yeah, in any case, yeah, I think those are all really good insights you bring up, Ryan. Um, in the interest of time, and I don't want to cut you off prematurely, but we can always circle back to any lingering thoughts you might have. I thought we would shift now to our next question, seeing that time is moving along, and I'm hoping you have the time to devote to the rest of these questions. If not, we can maybe revisit them, but I'm game if you are. So, anyways, getting to this next question, Ryan, why is it significant to study the metaphysical and existential origins? And this is Highland's approach. So, with the social matrix in mind, let's now move inward toward the existential heart of philosophical impulse. Studying the metaphysical and existential roots, in my view, of mystical philosophy, I think highlights that philosophy doesn't arise merely because societies become complex, but it arises from an existential condition, the human experience of wonder, astonishment, and the need to ask ultimate questions about being, mortality, and the cosmos. And questions as profound and unsettling as those asked by early thinkers, staring into the night sky or confronting the mystery of death at a funeral pyre. And so I think wonder is central, and the Greeks also recognized it as such. They kind of viewed wonder as this, you know, act of astonishment or to marvel at something. And um, the word that they used in ancient Greek was, uh, and I don't know if I'm botching this or not, but it's themozyne, if my pronunciation is correct. And themozyne means to be struck by awe, to regard with admiration or amazement. And its philosophical usage goes all the way back to Plato in his Theaetetus and was made central by Aristotle in his Metaphysics, where Aristotle wrote that, "For it is owing to their wonder, themozyne, that men both now begin and at the first began to philosophize." So, in other words, themozyne is the sort of effective origin of philosophy. It's the deep, ungrounded awe in the face of existence itself. And so, philosophy begins not with answers, but with wonder, such as the awe that Heraclitus expressed when he observed the ever changing flow of the river. Highland's emphasis reminds us that true philosophy is an existential necessity, a response to the lived experience of being thrown into the mystery of existence, much like the shock of realizing one's own mortality or contemplating the vast silence of the stars. Studying these roots reawakens that inner sanctuary, preserving philosophy from becoming um, mere academic exercise and grounding it once again in the raw, primordial astonishment that first stirred human thought. So that's my take, Ryan, on the significance of examining the metaphysical and the existential origins of mystical philosophy. So I'm curious of what your take is on this, whether any of that resonated with you, or if you might have a different take.
Yeah, I think that pretty well resonates with me. I think the metaphysical and the existential origins are absolutely vital. I mean, we may not see uh, necessarily philosophy arise in a mystical sense. Like might not get a mystical philosophy simply out of wonder. I think there's maybe some social aspects and some other elements that might come into play there that uh, make a philosophy mystical or not. But I think the general propensity for there to be philosophy at all, the condition for philosophy is this sort of existential and metaphysical sort of struggle that we have with existence as human beings.
Yeah, I think we both agree to that. I think that it's almost like this um, open-eyed, childlike curiosity that one brings to the world. And I think that we all have it within us. I think it's universal to the human condition. It's part of human nature. But like we've alluded to in previous threads of our conversation, that I think that um, in mature individuals it's rare. That the wonder, the wide-eyed wonder that a child is born into the world with, can often become subdued through through the process of living, and it's manifested in rare individuals who dedicate their lives to philosophy, whether in the ivory tower or whether barefooted, wandering around the agora, the Greek marketplace, or whatever. Um, I think it's central to being a philosopher, to ask questions out of a sense of uh, wonder, astonishment. Um, I think is part of the bedrock of what it is to be a philosopher in some ways. So I think wonder is crucial in that sense. And
I was gonna say, I think the philosopher is stamped out of most of us by about the age of 6, when our parents get annoyed with us for asking the question why over and over again.
yeah, yeah, precisely. I think that I think in a maybe a more civilized and advanced um, world, that inherent tendency would be nurtured and brought to you know mature fruition. And I think that we live in a more harmonious and wiser society if we did that. But I suppose we got barriers and obstacles to that. Not least our parents telling us to shut up. Um, but
Next thing you know, you're explaining quantum physics to a baby.
yeah. Well,
This is why.
I'm sure there's some young, baby Einsteins out there who would soak all of that in. And I think that um, sort of as a fruitful digression, I think all this points to the importance of nurturing this tendency at an early stage of development. Maybe this should be written into parenting manuals or something. This should be the law of parenting, the nomos of parenting. Um, you know, Thou shalt encourage natural wonder in our, um, in our progeny. Um, but yeah, kidding aside, Ryan. Yeah, I think we both agree that wonder is central to this tendency to inquire about things, Ryan. Um, I don't know if I necessarily have anything too much to add to this one. Um, I think that is fairly straightforward for me. I don't have much arguments against it. Do you have anything else you want to add? Okay. Well, let's move along then to our next guiding question. So, next question to ask is, why is it significant to study the psychological origins of mystical philosophy? So here's my take. Um, let's consider the individual dimension, the psychological soil from which philosophical thought takes root. So, in my view, understanding the psychological roots allows us to appreciate that philosophy is not only historically and existentially conditioned, but also psychologically mediated. Traits like openness to experience, emotional sensitivity, conscientiousness, and existential depth play crucial roles. For example, a highly open individual might be drawn to abstract metaphysical speculation, while someone with deep emotional sensitivity might feel compelled to explore the suffering of existence and the possibility of transcendence, much like the meditative practices of Pythagorean silence or Socratic introspection. Figures like Pythagoras weren't average members of their societies, they were outliers, individuals whose inner complexity, curiosity, and longing led them beyond inherited myths into profound new syntheses of rationality and spirituality, as when Pythagoras combined numerical abstraction with Orphic purification rituals, or when Heraclitus translated emotional depth into paradoxical reflections on flux and unity. Philosophy, then, is both universal and rare, latent in us all, but actualized by those who have the psychological readiness to endure its demands, much like those rare souls who embrace solitude and radical questioning rather than the comfort of convention. So that's my take, Ryan, on the significance of the psychological origins. Um, and I'd be curious to get your take on this.
One sec. Um, yeah, I think the emphasis on psychology is important, and like you said, people being outliers in this respect. So when I think of someone who's a mystic or a mystical philosopher, I sometimes think of you know monks, like Christian monks, people who like abstain from. Well, they're supposed to abstain from alcohol, but there was a time they were known for being very drunk
Right.
in the monasteries. Uh, but yeah, abstain from alcohol, abstain from sex, abstain from just like normal everyday, uh, you know, life things. So there's this standing outside of element. So that takes a certain psychology, I would say, like a certain kind of person, a certain kind of dedication to live that kind of life.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's a pretty astute observation. The way that I'm thinking about that is bringing this back to personality theory and conscientiousness, for example. This tendency to be, disciplined and regimented, and being able to, I suppose, um, you know, delay your immediate gratification in the service of, um, you know, um, a a higher principle or something transcendent. Um, so for example, like I'm thinking of the ascetic monks, might be in denial of certain pleasures of the body, of consumption of alcohol or sexual abstinence um, or other certain, strictures of voluntary denial and so forth. And, I think that points to a certain type of personality, as you alluded to.
Yeah, so like the denomination that I'm involved with would be kind of considered one of those more, I would say, not extreme, but like they're very heavy emphasis on like how you live your life and your lifestyle. So like emphasis on not drinking, not smoking, um, living, abstinence, that sort of thing, and dressing modestly. Um, just like very counterculture in a weird way. It's kind of cool, even though it's like you know in some ways it's lame, but the lameness is cool because culture today is all about you know showing off your body or like just being immodest all of the time. So yeah, like living a life that is counter to what is of the norm.
Right. Yeah. So that takes, I think, a certain degree of um, independence from, the norms of your society. Um, a non-conforming tendency, um, and I think that can be a manifestation of conscientiousness. This ability to, um, you know, act in the service of what you consider to be, um, you know, a a guiding principle, or um, a an ethical principle, and not being, I suppose, um, swayed or seduced by all of the um, temptations that are um, put in front of you, in the culture that we live in. Like this emphasis on, immediate gratification, um, intoxication, you know, getting drunk, partying all the time. There's a certain discipline that I think that this spiritual orientation requires. Um, and we don't necessarily also need to look at conscientiousness, but there's the other factors we mentioned too, like openness, this inherent and intrinsic curiosity, as well, which I think, you know drives mystical philosophy, um, drives um, that yearning um, to know about the things and how everything hangs together, and so there's that element too, and there's a variety of different elements we could look at when thinking of personality in this way.
I was gonna say neuroticism. A little bit neurotic.
Yeah, the existential angst, right? Like,
Yeah.
the Soren Kierkegaard types, or the Hamlets. You know, the restless souls who are driven to overcome their restlessness, I guess, by a search for meaning. Um, and I mean, that's something that resonates with me. Because I've been in states of despair before, where I've been thinking to myself, what's the meaning of it all? And so I've, taken actions to find meaning in my life, but it was born, I guess, of despair, maybe of, you know being perpetually melancholy, or so on. And so I think that, this is kind of like a negative motivator towards mysticism. Like there's positive motivators, like, you know um, maybe a striving towards harmony, or transcendence, or something like that. But there's also sort of the negative motivation, which is kind of like the alleviation of pain and anxiety and despair, and so on and so forth. So I guess there's maybe like a yin yang interplay here too, when thinking about these personality factors that give birth to mystical philosophy and a mystical worldview.
When I think of mysticism, I think about it as a response to dealing with death,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's sort of this: how do you, how does one respond in the face of death, right? And you can accept it, like they're dead, they're gone, and nothing's ever going to change that, or you can have this belief in sort of resurrection, rebirth, and it sort of gives you a feeling of things will be all right, you know,
Right.
like they will live again. And so it's a way of confronting that neurotic feeling and that anxiety of death.
Right.
the idea that like we're gonna be reborn. I mean,
Right.
tangibly, that's done through reproduction, right? Like
Right.
that's and hopefully our kids will do better than we did, and so on and so forth. But it's the only way that we can really get over our own death is by thinking of this way of being able to live on or live forever or be reborn. And in some ways we
Right.
are in our children. Like, I'm
Yeah.
30 and I'm still trying to figure out where I begin and my parents end. Like, you know
Right.
what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, uh, because I'm still so much like my dad, still so much like my mom. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, preservation through propagation, and you know, transmitting your essence through reproduction into the next generation, um, I think can be an antidote towards this death anxiety, as you pointed out. And that's one lens to interpret it. At least, I think a figure like Pythagoras would say that he would actually believe that the soul would migrate onto another body after it dies. So if he was a little more, um, I suppose, lends itself to more of um, a belief that the soul isn't strictly limited towards the body. Like when the body dies, the soul extinguishes. His view would be more that the soul is more or less like the electrical spark in everybody. That when the body perishes, the physical machinery is lifeless and dead, but the spark that animated the machinery still continues and might go on to reanimate another organic machine or body, if you want to think about it in those terms. Um, but yeah,
uh,
those are some different ways
that's
of conceptualizing it.
that's exactly how I see it too. But it's like I'm part of like that spark is in me. Like, you know what I mean? Like where it's sort of this. It's like a wave, right? It's like different parts of the wave, different peaks and troughs, but it's still the same wave. There's it's a different time, but it's all part of the same event.
Yeah,
The same soul, but
yeah, yeah. I mean, there's the multiplicity of individual souls, and then there's the grand unity that all of these souls are a part of, the monad or the one, and so forth. Maybe that, according to one view, when we die, our soul returns to the one, our individual soul returns to the one, uh, or it might take a different route. It might become reincarnated into a tree or a dog, or um, perhaps if our life was well lived, we would ascend to a higher manifestation of existence, like maybe some kind of enlightened yogi, capable of, you know, um, I don't know, superhuman feats. Um,
I was gonna say if you could pick, what would you be reincarnated as?
oh, that would take me some time to think of because um, I'm sure there's a lot of good future incarnations that I could think of. Um, but I don't necessarily want to dive down that rabbit hole in the interest of bringing our conversation full circle and to bring things to summation, Ryan. So if you have about 10 or 15 minutes, I think we could get all this wrapped up. How does that sound?
Sounds good. Yeah, let's go on to what next one here.
Yeah, so this is our fifth question in our inquiry, and it's that why is Pythagoreanism a perfect case study for understanding mystical philosophy's origins and significance? So, to ground all of these insights, let's now take focus on a pivotal figure, Pythagoras, whose synthesis offers a living case study. So here's my take. Pythagoras represents a perfect case study because his thought embodies the full synthesis we seek to understand. So, um, first, there's the mystical element. So, this is rooted in direct experience of unity, transcendence, and harmony, such as the Pythagorean belief in the music of the spheres, the inaudible cosmic harmony created by the movement of celestial bodies, which he claimed could be perceived through spiritual attunement. Then there's the mathematical dimension, a rational, abstract system that seeks to reveal the hidden order of the cosmos, exemplified in his discovery of numerical ratios governing musical intervals and his geometric relationships, such as the theorem that still bears his name. Then there's the ethical component, deeply concerned with purification, moral discipline, and the transformation of the soul, seen in practices like vegetarianism, silence, and ritual exercises aimed at aligning the soul with divine proportion and order. Finally, there's the existential element, aimed at aligning the human soul with the cosmic order and achieving self realization, where the individual's life was led to be lived in harmony with the larger structure of reality, guided by contemplation, aesthetic practice, and moral clarity. So I think that Pythagoras shows that mystical philosophy isn't anti-rational. It is the fulfillment of rationality in service of transcendence. His life and teachings remind us that mathematics, when rooted in awe, becomes a sacred language for unveiling the divine structure of existence. So, those are my thoughts on the psychological origins in a nutshell. So, what's your take on that, Ryan?
Sorry, that was your summary of what? On the
Oh, well, sorry.
Pythagorean.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
He said psychological.
Yeah, no. I think that was a psychological hiccup. No, so that's my take on the sort of the reasons why I think it's important to study Pythagoras and as an exemplar of the mystical tradition. Um, so yeah, having said that, what's your take?
uh, yeah, I mean, he's a he's a good exemplar. I mean, he's the classic Italian mystic that I think anybody would kind of run into when they were first researching the topic. So everyone's probably familiar with a squared plus b squared equals c squared. um, he's known uh, in mathematics even to this day. Sorry, I'm getting tired. But yeah, I don't really have much to say about other mystics and what other cases we would even have. He's the only one that I know up to this date. So, do you know any other mystical philosophers, Graham, or is like Italian mystics?
Yeah, well, I think that there are other key figures in the mystical tradition, and I've dabbled around in studying some of their um, philosophies. I know that you could probably group Heraclitus within the mystical tradition, uh, as well as Empedocles, and I think they would all their philosophical worldviews would all share in sort of the foundational principles that we looked at that in Pythagoras, for example, and the emphasis on um, you know certain doctrines like the continuity of life, that life is just not limited in uh, space and time, but all life kind of is unified in space and time. And I think that some of these thinkers might subscribe to some of Pythagoras's views regarding the nature of the soul and its immortality and its mobility and moving from one incarnation to the next, and its the cyclical nature of things. Um, how things die and are reborn, and how life moves through cycles, seasonal cycles, biological cycles, biological rhythms, um, and and also sort of the mystical dimension to morality itself as well. That there's this pervading order which structures the universe, and that to be in harmony with the universe is to align yourself with that order. To become attuned to the music of the spheres, as it were. Um, and I guess maybe post Pythagoras, there's figures like Plotinus. You can maybe lump Spinoza in there. Um, yeah, modern day mystics. I mean, like Aldous Huxley, in his Doors of Perception and in his perennial philosophy. I think we could come up with a pretty long list, but these are the ones that are kind of immediately coming to mind. But yeah, I think they would all share in some of these basic principles of mysticism that we've talked about in our conversation over the last while. So yeah, so anyhow, if you don't have any other particular questions or reflections or anything, we can shift on to our last question and then bring things to summation if that works.
Yeah, sorry, I'm coughing.
Oh yeah, it's all good. Um, well, let me just put the question this way. So, why study the origins of mystical philosophy? Uh, or sorry, why is I'm getting tired now. So, why is the study of the origins of mystical philosophy relevant today? So, um, let's bring our inquiry home, and let's ask the question: why does this matter now in our time? And so, personally, studying mystical philosophy reconnects me to sacredness, wonder, and cosmic meaning, especially through contemporary rituals that echo ancient practices. So when I dance at a rave, surrounded by pulsating bass, entranced lights, and a sea of moving bodies, I feel the same communal ecstasy that ancient Greeks may have experienced in Dionysian rites. Practices like breathwork and silent walking meditations reawaken in me a sense of alignment with a larger cosmic rhythm. Binaural beats evoke the music of the spheres in a modern register. And MDMA opens the heart in a way that mirrors the use of ancient sacraments for inducing unity and reverence. These aren't just fleeting moments of pleasure, they are, for me, initiatory experiences that reveal something perennial in the human spirit. Culturally, mystical philosophy offers a remedy for the fragmentation, nihilism, and spiritual exhaustion of modernity. We live in a time where many feel disconnected from meaning, overwhelmed by information, but starving for wisdom. Mystical philosophy reminds us that reason and wonder need not be opposed, but can illuminate one another. Individuality and community can be harmonized, as in the dance floor where the I dissolves into a shared pulse. Science and myth, order and transcendence can coexist in a new synthesis. Mystical philosophy points toward a vision where humanity can heal its alienation by recovering the sacred rhythms of existence, rhythms we may glimpse today in a moment of stillness, a swelling chord, or a collective breath beneath the stars. So that's my views on sort of the personal and cultural significance of studying the origins of mystical philosophy. So um, I'm curious to hear how all of that resonates with you.
Yeah, I am on board with the uh, idea for it kind of being a remedy for a lot of like nihilism and spiritual exhaustion. Um, but for me, not so much the raves and the MDMA these days,
Right.
but for me, it's more about like the Bible, following
Yeah.
following those kind of things. Like I'm more about the aesthetic life, not really engaging in what modern culture. Not to say that like raves are modern culture, because it can be pretty niche and like I get it, but
Yeah.
yeah, there's a certain rhythm and experience that I get from engaging in these rituals. I
Hmm.
feel like in following the Bible as closely that I can, I can feel myself participating in the rhythm of history in this weird way. And like in the benign daily activities that I do,
Hmm.
they become spiritually significant because it's I'm participating in something that's so much greater than me, and that um, forces me to constantly, continually to grow in it. Right, like it's not something that I'm ever gonna be perfect at.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, it's like a continual deepening, and yeah, I don't know. My experience of it has been nothing short of just like amazing. It's almost like having mushroom trips without having mushroom trips.
Right.
Because I'll have moments where I'm stone cold sober, and it's like I have this experience where I'm in a room filled with people who are not of my faith, like complete opposite, right? And it feels like I'm, all of a sudden in at the edge of the kingdom in medieval Europe somewhere. You know what I mean? I'm like a British monk, and it's like this weird blending of timelines that happens.
Right.
It's like time just ceases to exist when you start to follow, or when I've started to follow the Bible. Like I've had those sorts of like religious and mystical experiences where this is what this would be like being in this time, like understanding the perspective of the people that were like living that life because I'm following the same sort of path. Not everyone in the Bible was perfect, far from it. A lot of the apostles were not the best people, right? So,
Yeah.
but if you start living their life, you can start to understand what they saw,
Right.
which is cool, right? Like you can go back in time in a weird way and like get a glimpse into their perspective just by doing the things that they were doing.
Right. Yeah. That I mean, all that makes sense to me, Ryan. It resonates with me too. I think that in dedicating yourself to spiritual pursuits, um, you know, on a personal level, you feel like you're participating in something greater than yourself. Um, and I think that you can get this experience without the drugs, without the MDMA, without the mushrooms. I mean, I've gotten there um, just from being in an ordinary state of consciousness. I feel like that um, aligning yourself with certain principles and precepts, um, like live according to nature, um, live in harmony with truth, um, you know, um, be virtuous, be kind to others, and so on and so forth. These are all principles and precepts which I think help to tune you into um, that layer of reality, which we might call the divine, um, and the experience of um, you know um, being connected to something greater than yourself. Um, you know, being being connected to others and having concern for their well-being, for instance. Um, I think these can all manifest through um, dedicating your life to living in accord with certain principles. Principles that are rooted in um, you know the truth and the harmony which pervades everything that exists. And then yeah, as to like the more cultural, impersonal part of it, yes, I think that mysticism is an antidote to nihilism. I think because it provides you with um, that antidote, which is the realization of the meaning of existence. And why um, why your life is important, um, or why life is important more generally. Um, yeah, but do you want to add anything, Ryan? Or I thought we could now bring things full circle and bring things to summation.
Yeah, let's synthesize some of this stuff here.
Yeah, yeah. Let's get synthetic here. So, um, meaning just let's weave together the key insights that have emerged through this episode. So, one is that philosophy emerges organically from the entangled whole of human existence. It grows not from isolated causes, but from the interwoven dynamics of social, psychological, and existential forces. While analysis allows us to discern patterns and structures, we must remember that the origins of philosophy are not mechanical parts to dissect, but a living unity to encounter with reverence. The second synthesis is that mystical philosophy balances wonder and critical reason. It offers a middle path between dogma and skepticism. It honors the sacred without rejecting logic, and it pursues truth without losing the poetry of the soul. This synthesis is evident in figures like Pythagoras, who used mathematics not to reduce the world, but to reveal its hidden harmony. Philosophy, and this is the third point, philosophy is a universal possibility, but a rare achievement requiring cultivation. The seeds of inquiry are within all of us, but they only blossom in those who are willing to endure solitude, embrace paradox, and remain open to transformation. Outliers like Pythagoras or Heraclitus exemplify what it means to actualize this latent potential. And the final synthesis here is that studying mystical origins is transformative personally and culturally. It invites us to reconnect with a dimension of life that modernity often forgets, whether through communal dance, silent contemplation, or symbolic ritual. These practices carry the resonance of ancient truths. They remind us that wisdom is not only about thinking clearly, it is about living deeply and listening to the cosmic rhythms that echo through both the stars and the soul. So, those are, I think, some of the key syntheses, Ryan, that we can gather. Um, and we can take a brief pause if you have anything you'd like to add or any reflections. Otherwise, we can bring things to conclusion.
Let's land the plane.
All right. Well, landing gear is now been activated, and we're making our descent. So, to close things, let's close not with an answer, but with an invitation, which is this: what would it mean to live as if the origins of philosophy were still happening inside us today? What would it mean to treat each moment of wonder as a spark of inquiry, each tension we feel as a call to reflection, each ordinary act, walking, listening, dancing, questioning, as a gateway to the sacred rhythm that stirred the first philosophers? Let that question linger in the silence after this conversation ends. Let it walk beside you in your daily life, and perhaps one day whisper back an insight uniquely your own. Until next time, stay curious, stay receptive, and above all, keep the Dialogos alive, not just in words, but in the way you move through the world.